Merrill Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Let's talk about Regional Cities New South Wales, because you're an alliance of 15 regional cities from across the state, including from Dubbo. Now, the alliance aims to grow regional cities right across the state through increased investment that will build productive, livable and connected regions. A few things I wanted to get to. A, how's the group going and what have you been doing? And what are the implications from the New South Wales budget, if any?
Yeah, a couple of answers there for you. The first thing is going well. So this is really probably the grown-up version of the old Evo Cities. You might remember that Evo Cities was launched back in 2010. And the idea of Evo Cities was we initially had 7 cities together, and we thought there was more strength and more power in marketing those 7 Evo cities to metropolitan areas, mainly Sydney. And then as time went on, we realised there was probably more value in a slightly larger group. So it grew a little bit. Same concept, same like-minded cities, really just growing that to 15 cities. So there's a good voice there from those 15 cities. And we do meet with government regularly. We do advocate for things. We also share, and I think that's probably a significant part of that, and something that's hard to put your finger on about the importance of that, but it is very important. So when we gather around, we normally meet at Parliament House, for example, and we talk about some of the challenges we have in regional cities, just sharing that information, sharing that knowledge, but also sharing solutions. There is an incredible value on that. So you're not alone when you have things happening in your city. You're not alone, but also someone else says, well, actually, we had that problem 6 months ago and we tried this and that didn't work, but this thing over here worked. Oh, wow, that's great. We should try that. So it's that type of approach, I suppose. We do talk to government about what we'd like to see, and when it comes around budget time, we do certainly talk about that as well. And I think there's been some big ears from this government, talking to this government on a regular basis, meeting with their ministers, and they've been listening. And I think when I see the budget, I see things, and they've probably got feedback from more places, but I think we see things that are important to us, and we see some of those reflected in the budget. So funding for housing, for example, funding for road and rail connectivity, digital connectivity, water security, I think is another one we've seen a bit in there. So certainly I think there's some things that we're seeing in this budget. And I don't want to sound like the typical government announcement where you throw money around, but I'll throw some of that money around. And one thing you've got to be careful of, I think, Bret, is when you see announcements, and I had this conversation with a politician many years ago where they said some numbers. They said, we're spending X billions on this and X billions on that. And I talked to them afterwards and said, so what are the outcomes of those? What are you going to achieve? And the politicians just kept rolling out the numbers. So I want to be careful that we don't just say numbers and say, isn't that good because they're spending money? But it's our money. The government's spending our money. Council spends our money. So we've got to be careful we don't just say, isn't it exciting they're spending money? You're just getting back your same money. But just to throw a couple of numbers around there, having said all that, $5.1 billion they're spending on 8,400 social homes across the state. So we see that as something good, and we've certainly been talking to the government about that. And $253.7 million for the state's planning system. Now, this is a really big one. We met with Paul Scully, the Minister for Planning, recently, and we talked about some of the problems around that. There's a thing called the planning portal. Around those regional cities, we talked about it, and most of those regional cities, including Dubbo, have got an extra person on our staff to manage the planning portal. The planning portal's job is to make things more efficient and make it better in the planning system, yet we're all using more staff to make the system more efficient, which kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense. To his credit, Paul Scully did say that he's aware of some problems with the planning portal and working on those problems. But again, this is what we need. For all the housing we need, Bret, we need planners to be able to approve the housing. So we think that's a good thing. Regional housing, certainly some money on some key health worker accommodation up in Tweed Heads and Lismore. There are a couple of our members there. $85 million for the Housing Infrastructure Fund, Tweed Heads and Wagga. So again, there are a couple of our members. So we're seeing some money being spent there. I must admit, I'm not overly impressed about the $450 million announced for essential worker accommodation being built in inner Sydney for the nurses, teachers, paramedics and police officers, for 400 of those. And I suppose the thing that I don't love about that idea is those workers are essential. But what about the builders that need to build the homes for those essential workers? Aren't they important? What about the plumbers? What about the sparkies? What about the planners that need to plan the homes for these essential workers? What about the bus drivers to get the kids to the school so the teachers can do their wonderful work? So it just seems a bit unfair that you're picking out of all those different essential workers across the state, only 400 are going to get a 20% rent discount in inner Sydney. So I don't.
When you break it down like that, that's pretty sad, because it sounds like it's a lot of money. But again, there were promises for the election, and this is where it's taken us, I think.
You're quite possibly right there. And these are government staff. And I wrote my article this week as a bit of a hypothetical, saying imagine if council built accommodation just for council employees at a 20% discount, and we used ratepayers' money to do it. And the reaction that I got from that was what I expected. That wouldn't be that popular a decision. It seems a bit unfair for other people. So one of the solutions we think from regional cities is really to move some of those people out of Sydney, get them out to regional areas. So there's a little bit of work that's being done on that. So we still think there's work to be done on the workplace hub. So we've got a workplace hub in Dubbo. We know that's expanding, so that's fantastic. But we've been pushing for the workplace hubs to be replicated across all of our regional cities. We think that's a great solution. And even just, for example, the Department of Regional New South Wales, there's 400 Sydney-based staff that we believe could be moved to regional locations. It kind of makes sense. You're the Department of Regional New South Wales, but you're based in Sydney. So taking some of those workers out of Sydney, moving them to regional locations, would help the squeeze, if you like, in Sydney. And for those 400 essential workers, maybe they don't need to be in Sydney. Maybe they could be in places like Orange or Bathurst or Wagga or Dubbo. So there's some things there that we think could keep going down. But again, it's not all doom and gloom. We think there's some good work that's been done, again, with some of the regional rail connectivity, 66 million to fix country rail programs, and 1.2 billion for the rail fleet. So that's obviously replacing that ageing rail fleet. So that's important. We also gave them a program of pinch points. So there's about $350 million could be spent on these pinch points across the state. That's freight pinch points. They are spending $3.3 billion on state and local roads and $290 million towards the Zero Safer Roads program. So they're good moves as well. More money being spent on regional roads. That's obviously a good thing in general. So again, some regional connectivity, $283 million on digital connectivity in regional New South Wales. We think that's good. One of the things I find interesting is the Regional Development Trust. That was announced as $350 million. That's now been allocated up to $400 million in total. So that's a good thing. But we're having trouble working out how we access some of that money. Regional Development Trust sounds great for regional areas. How do we get access to it? How do we apply for that money? When are we going to see that money flowing through? So announcements of money is great, but announcements of how that money is being spent, I think, is pretty important as well. We're also seeing $1.4 billion on regional education program.
All right. So when will Regional Cities New South Wales meet again to discuss the budget? Is this something that's on your agenda for next meeting?
Absolutely right. We've got our next meeting in August, and we have been, to the government's credit, we've been getting good access to ministers. It's normal for us to be, when we have our meetings at Parliament House, we'll normally meet with about 4 ministers on average, and that gives us a chance to really drill down in some of these areas. And there's nothing like hearing from the cities that are impacted by government decisions. And I think what the government is seeing is that regional cities is a very effective tool for them to get some feedback rather than go and meet with 15 individual mayors, meeting with 15 mayors in the room at the same time. And we focus on things that are common across those. So it's not something where one mayor will say, in my council area, this is one little individual specific problem we have. We talk about things that are common, maybe not across all 15, but are common across the majority of those areas. How can we make things better for the majority? And without a doubt, the combined voice, we think, is being heard by the government, and we also think that they're taking notice of that, and we're seeing some of that reflected in some of these things in the latest budget.
Matt, the former coalition that was in government, now in shadow government, some of their criticisms are that this is not new money in this budget, but it's been repackaged and it's disingenuous to pass that off as their own. What are you saying to something like that? Because, I mean, you've got to still be happy with and I guess nice to the government to get anywhere with any funding, don't you?
Far be it for me to start getting in the middle of a opposition versus government argument, but I think that's something that we see a lot. I don't think any government has been immune from that process, Bret, where you see an announcement and then a re-announcement and then another announcement on top of that re-announcement of the last announcement. So you do see a little bit of that. Ultimately, this is the state budget, and we've certainly been having meetings with the government about the state budget. Some of that announcement, some of the things that they've announced certainly have been announced in the lead up to the budget, but they're then part of the budget. What we've got to do is work with the state government, whatever flavour of state governments in at the time, work with them to say, here are the things important to people in regional New South Wales. And I think some of the solution to the problems really are to get more people in regional areas. We've got the room for growth, but we still need more housing. So we've still got housing affordability, housing shortages, and we had our mayoral developers forum last night, and that is an opportunity for us to explore more ways to keep promoting that housing. The great news is, Bret, people want to be in Dubbo. Fantastic. People want to be in regional cities. They want to be in Tweed Heads and Lismore and Bathurst and Tamworth. That's fantastic, but we want to make sure we've got the right facilities and the right housing in place for them when they come to these wonderful regional locations.
The Chair of Regional Cities New South Wales, Matthew Dickerson. Sadly, I'm out of time, Matt, but I really appreciate you bringing us up to date. When was that meeting in August? What date?
The next board meeting, Bret, will be held on the 8th of August at Parliament House, but it's actually 2 days we typically do. The 7th of August will be a meeting with some of the ministers. We get some one-on-one time with some of the ministers, and then the 8th of August is the Thursday. That will be our board meeting, and we normally have a couple of ministers come along and present to the board as well.
Okay, all right, enjoy that. And hopefully you and I can catch up at another stage, because I know we have you in on Fridays as Dubbo Region Mayor, which we can catch up and continue, but maybe we should put it on our calendar to catch up occasionally for Regional Cities New South Wales, if that's okay with you.
Happy to do that, Bret.
Excellent. All right, looking forward to it. Matthew Dickerson there.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.